While Mitchell Cook was doing his best to find out where Lily and Phoebe were being held, Kevin was busy looking through the pill room at the Swinton family's mansion. He needed a lot of special herbal ingredients if he was going to make a system cleansing pill to save Catherine's life from the poison that she'd been given. Kevin took out precious and rare medicinal herbs one after another and placed them together on the large work table. As he did this, he mumbled to himself, "This flower could be useful and it's pretty expensive, and some bodybuilding grass. That doesn't seem too bad. There's a lot of useful stuff here." Any herbalist watching him casually tossing all these valuable ingredients into a pile would have been furious with him, and a little bit jealous. Just as Kevin was about to take a quick break and stretch a little bit, his phone suddenly rang. "Hi, Brett. What can I do for you?" Kevin asked happily. Brett Stewart pretended to be unhappy and teased him. "Why did you say that, Kevin? Couldn't it be that I just miss you and felt like saying hi? Why do you always think I need something?" "Hey, you don't need a reason to call, bro. What's up?" Kevin replied with an embarrassed smile. "Let's get to the point. I have something important to tell you. The Alliance is attacking the Central Alternative Healing Academy at this very moment. The 10 major schools are all on alert. I just found out that all the elite members of the Union are going to be sent out. So I've decided to let you take command of 50,000 men and women to attack the Union while they're distracted," Brett Stewart explained to him in a very serious tone. Kevin couldn't help but gasp when he heard this news. This was huge. The Radiance that he had just set up still had less than 50,000 members, so Brett Stewart was launching an attack with more people in it than he had in his entire organization. Brett heard no reply for a long time, so he asked, "Kevin, are you listening to me?" "I'm here. It's just that attacking the Union isn't a minor operation. Are you sure the information you got is reliable? And I'm afraid I may disappoint you." Kevin was very straightforward with him and said what he wanted to say. Although he had a grudge against the Union, it wasn't to the extent that he would annihilate the entire organization. Besides, he'd never commanded so many people at once. Plus, he hardly had any time to prepare. What if he made a horrible mistake? "Kevin, let me tell you something that's been weighing on me for a long time." Brett Stewart's tone suddenly became heavy. "I'm relying on you and Dalton to help me finally be accepted as the Supreme Commander." Brett took a moment to let that sink in. Then he explained, "When I was Deputy Commander, I was known for my wisdom and resourcefulness. But I've run into some resistance with my new position. So I need a big victory to establish myself in my current position. Even though Travis Adams chose Dalton just before his death, he still didn't join the Myriads. So you're the only one with any talent that the members can trust right now." Kevin remained silent for a long time because what Brett said was so extraordinarily important. How many people could die in this battle? Is it really worth it? Kevin subconsciously asked himself. "Kevin, you're like a brother to me. You'll be responsible for thousands of lives. Do you know what I'm getting at?" Brett Stewart answered his own question. "A lot of people's futures are at stake, not to mention the legacy of the Myriads. If I fall, a lot of people will go down with me." Kevin felt as if he had a bone stuck in his throat. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't get it to come out of his mouth. After a long pause, he asked, "When are we going to do it?" "It will take a few days to gather enough people together. We'll all meet at the headquarters in 5 days." Brett Stewart suddenly smiled in relief. After he hung up the phone, Kevin was in a daze, because at that moment, he realized that he'd glimpsed his own future in Brett Stewart. Kevin had no choice but to continue on this path. Someday he would also become a person in a high position just like Brett Stewart, and he could find himself in the same predicament. At the main entrance of an exclusive suburban neighborhood in St. Louis, a very expensive limousine was parked by the side of the road. Virgil Huxley got out of the car and looked around cautiously, then quickly walked through the entrance. When Virgil found the right home, he went inside and saw a man sitting in a dark room with his back at the entrance. The man said to him roughly, "You shouldn't have come here yourself." Virgil Huxley was very agitated and responded,
"If I hadn't come here to look for you again, my entire family would be finished."
In just half a day's time, the Swinton family and the Thompson family had joined forces to crush the Huxley family, causing them to lose most of their real estate holdings and tanking their stocks. If it hadn't been for Virgil's order to fight back at all costs, they would have been bankrupt by now. "The Thompson family and the Swinton family are very powerful. The Stratus group won't be able to get rid of them so quickly." The man didn't pay any attention to Virgil's behavior. Then he added, "You should know that Joseph Thompson and Richard Swinton are protected by powerful warriors. Our men have been monitoring them 24/7, but we still haven't found a good opportunity to kill them."
"What about Herman Thompson? As long as he died, the Thompson family would surely fall into chaos. Although it wouldn't completely make up for my family's crisis, it would definitely reduce the pressure on us by more than half."
Virgil Huxley had already reached his breaking point and he was in a panic.
"Also, have you guys taken any measures against Kevin Williams yet?"
He wasn't sure how much Curtis Green had told Kevin. If he said anything about their unscrupulous business activities, the Huxley family would be doomed forever. "I advise you not to pay any attention to Herman Thompson. There have been a lot of experts coming to St. Louis over the past few days, and they're all staying at the Thompson family's estate," the man replied. "As for Kevin Williams, I've already sent people to attack him twice, but unfortunately, all of them failed and ended up dead." The man's tone didn't change at all, as if these things had absolutely no emotional effect on him.
"Then what do you think you should do?"
Virgil bellowed as he pleaded with the man for help.
"Don't forget that we're all in the same boat. If my family falls, your plan to position yourself advantageously in St. Louis will fail completely."
As soon as these words left his mouth, the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Virgil Huxley felt a deep chill that made him shiver uncontrollably.
"Are you threatening me?"
The man's voice seemed to come from the depths of hell. Virgil Huxley felt his heart skip a beat. In fact, he also realized that what he had just said had crossed the line, but now he had no other choice.
"Leave this place immediately. You'll have to deal with the Thompson family and the Swinton family by yourself. As for Kevin Williams, leave him to us."
The man raised his hand menacingly. The look on the man's face frightened Virgil so much that he ran out of the room like he'd been blown by a gust of wind. Just then, the man called out in a grim, merciless voice, "These are my orders. Send 21st grade assistants to St. Louis. They are to kill Kevin Williams at any cost." No one replied to him with words, but their actions spoke volumes. A few of them flashed past him into the dark corner of the room. The exit opened, and they were gone in an instant. Kevin had just finished selecting the ingredients and was about to start concocting the system cleansing pill when he heard someone knocking on the door. "Who is it?" Kevin asked in surprise. Before entering the pill room, he had clearly ordered that no one should disturb him. "Please pardon the intrusion, sir. Mr. Thornton Huxley has come to see you. He said that he wants to meet with you no matter what. We really can't do anything to him. You should go and see him," the Swinton's family messenger explained respectfully. "Thornton is here? What could he possibly want?" Kevin frowned slightly. Now that Kevin's relationship with the Huxley family had turned sour, why had Thornton decided to come and see him? Didn't make any sense. During a secret meeting, Virgil Huxley had been told to deal with the Swinton and Thompson families on his own, while the mysterious man vowed to have Kevin killed despite having already failed twice. He then sent 20 first-grade assassins from the Stratus group to finish the job at any cost. Meanwhile, just as Kevin was about to concoct the system cleansing pill for Catherine Swinton, he was informed that Thornton Huxley had unexpectedly paid a visit to the Swinton family's mansion to see him. "Sir, would you like to see him?" the Swinton family's messenger boldly asked. "Go and tell him to wait for 2 hours." Kevin knew very well that his current priority was to refine a system cleansing pill for Catherine Swinton. Time was of the essence to cure the poison that had spread throughout her body. After the messenger left, Kevin looked at the bronze furnace in front of him. It was even taller than his own one back in Chicago, and his eyes showed a touch of excitement. "Looks like Dad has some cool toys to play with in his home," Kevin muttered in a low voice. Then he proceeded to light the fire. In the Thompson family's mansion, Richard Swinton had been invited by Joseph Thompson to discuss some matters regarding what Kevin had found out from Curtis Green.
No wonder the Huxley family has been developing so rapidly these past few years. I was wondering why they never encountered any problems with their funds.
Richard sighed as he reviewed some documents.
As long as the evidence is conclusive, we can easily defeat the Huxley family.
It's too early to celebrate. Although all this information came from Curtis Green himself, how can we be so sure that he's telling the truth? Joseph Thompson took a sip of coffee. Moreover, with Curtis Green being our only witness now, we can't act recklessly while we're still gathering more evidence. Because of this, I haven't even told Grandpa Thompson about it. Otherwise, given his temper, he would have had Virgil Huxley shot to death by now. Richard Swinton slowly put down the document he was looking at.
How reliable do you think this information is?
I already sent some people to investigate the Huxley family's 2 shell companies, and they managed to find the name of the person who was in charge of illegally selling the cultural artifacts. He suddenly left St. Louis 2 months ago, but my people are looking for him now. Joseph put down his coffee mug and thought for a while. After a few moments, Joseph continued. I also heard from Scott Whitney that Mr. Williams has agreed to cooperate with the federal government and joined the Reaper Squad as its second-in-command.
When did this happen?
Richard Swinton suddenly leapt up from his chair in surprise. Just today, actually. That being said, there's another thing I wanted to talk to you about today. I heard that the Stratus group also tried to attack Mr. Williams a while back. Did he tell you anything about it? Joseph Thompson asked casually. Mr. Williams' situation is different now, and if something bad happens to him, St. Louis might be in danger from whoever comes out on top. Perhaps it's a good thing that he has the federal government behind him now. Actually, there'd never been a great power in St. Louis. If something were to happen to Kevin and the Radiants, how could it be safe and sound from evil forces? Who else would protect its ordinary citizens? At the same time, St. Louis had never experienced this kind of dangerous situation. In the past, even Alfred Dixon and his brothers only caused trouble much farther away from the city, over in Blade Mountain. This was because all the resources in St. Louis had been distributed fairly among its influential families. And with the Thompson, Swinton, and Huxley families at the forefront, no one dared to go against them. But now, with Kevin attracting enemies coming from left, right, and center at the same time, including the Huxley family, this would potentially disrupt everything that they had built in St. Louis. As a result, whether Kevin and the Radiants moving into the city would end up being a good or bad thing for them had yet to be determined. While Richard Swinton was thinking about this matter, their mobile phones rang at the same time. Both of them received the same news. Something had happened at the Radiance's branch in the southern part of the city. Inside the pill room of the Swinton family's mansion, Kevin was carefully adding the medicinal ingredients into the pill furnace. Over the past hour, he'd already failed 3 times. Although Kevin's herbalism skills were much higher than those of other people, this was also his first time concocting a high-grade herbal medicine like the system cleansing pill. Just then, a loud commotion suddenly can be heard from outside the door. "Mr. Huxley, you can't go in. Mr. Williams is currently busy refining medicinal pills," a female household staff member pleaded. "Please, Mr. Huxley, Mr. Williams told us not to let anyone disturb him. If he fails to concoct the pills, he'll surely blame us for it and we won't be able to bear being punished." Another one tried to reason with Thornton Huxley. Several of the Swinton family's household staff helplessly tried their best to stop him from getting any nearer to the pill room.
"All of you, get out of my way. Don't stop me. Kevin told me to wait for 2 hours. How long has it been?"
Thornton Huxley angrily retorted as he forced his way through.
"Didn't you say he was concocting pills? Let me go in and see what kind of pills he's refining then."
"Thornton is right. All of you move aside. If that country bumpkin dares to say anything, he'll have to face me." Gail Swinton scolded them with a stern look on her face. "What's there to be afraid of? Don't tell me that in your eyes I'm not as good as that country bumpkin." Upon hearing this, the household staff members had no choice but to make way for Thornton and Gail to enter the pill room as they lowered their heads. Gail Swinton had just returned from the hospital to get some rest. When she heard that Thornton Huxley had come to the family's mansion, she immediately went downstairs to greet him with a smile. However, when she found out that Kevin had rudely made Thornton wait for 2 hours while hiding in the pill room, the anger in Gail's heart was instantly ignited. Now, with nobody left in their way, Thornton kicked open the door to the pill room. The loud noise caused by their forced entry caught Kevin by surprise. As a result, his hand accidentally dropped all of the medicinal herbs into the pill furnace at once.
"Kevin, what the hell are you doing over there?"
Thornton asked loudly. "Are you hiding because you don't want to see me?" Gail still didn't know that Kevin was refining a medicinal pill for her mother. As the two of them spoke, Kevin suddenly became irritable. "Why did you guys come in here? All of you, get out now!" "Sir, I'm so sorry. Mr. Huxley and Miss Swinton forced their way in. We couldn't stop them." One of the household staff members apologized as she and the others fell to their knees and begged for mercy.
"Kevin, why are you being so rude to us? What are you refining pills for anyway?"
Thornton was shocked. "This is my home. Why should I listen to you? And if you want to be alone, you should be the one getting lost." Gail roared in dissatisfaction. "Shit!" Kevin quickly turned around and ran towards Thornton Huxley and the others. "Are you guys stupid or something? Can't you understand what I'm saying? You all have to leave this place now." "Why should I leave? This is my territory. You get out." Gail refused to give in and defiantly put her hands on her hips. Kevin looked back at the pill furnace and suddenly panicked. "Okay, suit yourselves. I'm getting out of here right now. Don't tell me I didn't warn you." After saying this, Kevin squeezed between the two of them and ran out into the yard. "Something's not right. Why was that country bumpkin so agreeable just now?" Gail wondered with some doubt.
"Oh, shit!"
Thornton suddenly cried out in surprise. He now realized what Kevin had meant by his words all along. "What's wrong, Thornton?" Gail exclaimed as she followed his gaze to the furnace in the middle of the room. The household staff kneeling on the ground looked up and they were dumbfounded. What was going on? Not far away, the pill furnace had become extremely red and swollen, and there were already several deep cracks that had formed on its surface. Scorching hot air was gushing out from inside. It looked like the entire cauldron was about to explode. However, they'd been too busy paying attention to Kevin earlier, so they didn't notice what was going on behind him.
"Run!"
Thornton swooped in to cover Gail, who was caught in a daze by what she saw and too frozen to act. But before he could even take a step forward, a loud bang resounded throughout the entire Swinton family's mansion. The cauldron was instantly shattered into pieces, causing the pill room to be enveloped in clouds of dust. "What's going on? Was there an earthquake?" One of the household staff members in the kitchen wondered.
"Sounds like it came from the pill room. Could there have been an accident there?"
The staff member beside her was worried. At the same time, all of the staff members who were busy working in other parts of the mansion started to discuss in low voices after they heard the noise. Although none of them were close enough to suffer any injuries, the explosion created a terrifying wave of energy that shook the entire household. Everyone was stunned as they looked out towards the pill room and saw that it was completely filled with dust. Meanwhile, Kevin wiped the sweat from his forehead and let out a huge sigh of relief. "Luckily, I ran fast, or else I might have been blown to pieces." As soon as he said that, he suddenly thought of something. "Oh no, this isn't good." Kevin cried out in alarm and ran back towards the pill room. As he looked at all the dust that was still floating in the air, he didn't know whether Thornton Huxley and the others had been able to withstand the impact of the explosion. Kevin was on his fourth attempt to refine the system cleansing pill when Thornton Huxley forcefully entered the pill room with Gail Swinton and some of the household staff. This caught him by surprise, causing him to accidentally drop all of the medicinal herbs into the pill furnace at once. When Kevin urged everyone to leave the room, Gail mistook his warning for rudeness and angrily refused. With no time to spare, Kevin rushed out of the pill room just before the cauldron exploded. Shortly after, he ran back inside to check on them amidst a cloud of dust. It took more than 10 minutes for the dust to dissipate as Kevin carefully made his way through the ruined pill room. He was incredibly anxious when he saw all the debris. The power of the explosion was much stronger than the one he generated back at the Healing Arts School. Suddenly, Kevin heard the sounds of some people coughing nearby. "They're not dead yet." Kevin was pleasantly surprised. He quickened his pace and walked towards the source of the sound. When he finally saw the faces of Thornton and the others, he couldn't hold back his laughter. Their faces were covered in a thick layer of dust and their clothes were all tattered and filled with holes. They looked like survivors of a volcanic eruption. Kevin tried his best to control his smile as he asked, "Are you guys all right?" Only then did Gail come back to her senses. Her eyes turned red and she started to cry. In her entire life, this was the first time she'd ever found herself in such a sorry state, and it was all because of Kevin.
"Why didn't you warn us earlier that the cauldron was about to blow up?"
There was a trace of blood at the corner of Thornton's mouth. The moment the cauldron exploded, he had used all the spiritual energy in his body to protect the others. Otherwise, there was no telling whether anyone else would have survived the impact or not. "Didn't I tell you to get out?" Kevin scratched the back of his head awkwardly and said, "You were the ones who were being stubborn and refused to leave."
"Wait, are you actually blaming us for this?"
Thornton almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "I must tell my father about this. He'll have no choice but to kick you out." Gail cried as she pointed at Kevin and whined like an angry child. "You guys should go clean up and rest first. If you really can't handle the pain, it's better to go to the hospital for a checkup. You may have some internal injuries," Kevin said to the household staff who were so frightened and shaken up from what had happened. He didn't care about Gail's hooting at all. "Thank you, sir." When the household staff members heard him say that, they were quite moved. Then he turned his attention to Thornton and Gail. "Why don't the two of you go and take a shower and clean up? If there's anything you want to discuss, we'll talk once you've had a chance to decompress and recover." Kevin shook his head and walked away. Fortunately, for convenience's sake, he'd put all the remaining herbs into a backpack, which he was able to grab before the explosion. Otherwise, he really wouldn't be able to refine the system cleansing pill for Catherine Swinton. Seeing how Kevin didn't take her threat seriously, Gail cried even harder, and because she was breathing so heavily, she accidentally choked on the surrounding dust, which made her cough even more violently. At the same time, at the construction site of the Radiance's branch in the southern part of St. Louis, A large group of people had surrounded some of the group's members. "Hand over the thieves from Blade Mountain," one of the citizens demanded.
As much as we welcome the presence of Mr. Williams and the Radiants in St. Louis, our hospitality doesn't extend to those thieves from Blade Mountain,"
another explained.
"If you don't hand them over right now, you should get the hell out of St. Louis immediately,"
a third one added. Facing the emotional civilians of St. Louis, the 5 Hill siblings protected Alfred Dixon and his 6 brothers behind him. No one knew who had provoked them, but an hour ago, thousands of civilians suddenly rushed into the construction site of the Radiant's St. Louis branch and demanded that they hand over Alfred Dixon and the others. If it wasn't for Dylan Hill and his siblings keeping things in order, the other members of the Radiants would have chased the crowd away in response. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the crowd as they split apart to create a path for Richard Swinton and Joseph Thompson, who quickly walked towards the members of the Radiants. Since these two were well-known figures in St. Louis, everyone immediately quieted down when they saw them arrive.
"Why have you all gathered here? Are you looking to cause trouble?"
Richard Swinton looked at the thousands of people sternly. A powerful aura radiated from his body as he said this. "Mr. Swinton, we only want justice. Those Blade Mountain thieves caused great harm to St. Louis. My sister died at their hands." One of the citizens explained her grievance.
"Mr. Swinton, do you know how it feels to lose someone in your family? When my father passed through Blade Mountain, he refused to hand over the herbs he just bought. Because of this, he was beaten to death by those bandits."
Another fumed in anger as he recalled the tragedy. The crowd started to get restless again. Ashamed of their actions, Alfred Dixon and his 6 brothers, who were still being protected by the 5 Hill siblings, just wanted to find a hole and hide in it. Although the Dixon brothers had always warned their men not to kill people when taking their goods, there were still some instances of disobedience and accidents that happened. At the time, they didn't think much of it, but now they finally understood how much damage their negligence had caused to the citizens of St. Louis.
"Will everyone please be quiet for a while?"
Richard Swinton circulated his spiritual energy around his body and made a thunderous sound that instantly quelled the restless crowd.
"Listen, the remaining Blade Mountain bandits have all surrendered to the Radiants. And now Alfred Dixon and his 6 other brothers have become Mr. Williams' subordinates. Please be assured that they'll contribute to the protection of St. Louis from now on."
"We don't need the protection of our enemies," one of the citizens protested. "He's right. It's only fair for them to pay us back with their lives. We can't let them off the hook just because of Mr. Williams," the person behind him agreed. "Mr. Swinton, my daughter is only 17 years old. She's in the prime of her life. What if they kill her in broad daylight?" a worried mother argued. These people didn't buy Richard Swinton's words of reassurance at all.
"Why don't we inform Mr. Williams about this immediately and let him decide what to do?"
Joseph Thompson sighed lightly. Even though he was in a high position, he had to consider the people's feelings.
"Silence!"
Richard suddenly roared once again. When the people in the crowd heard this, their ears immediately started to buzz, so they didn't dare to say anything that would provoke his anger any further.
"Please calm down. Now that Alfred Dixon and his brothers have shown remorse for their actions and pledged their loyalty to Mr. Williams, I can assure you that they'll no longer commit any more crimes."
Richard scolded them with a stern face.
"I know that all of you are seeking some justice, but don't take your anger out on them. Give us 2 days' time. We'll definitely provide you with the justice you deserve by then, okay? In the meantime, go back to your homes and stop bothering these men."
Virgil Huxley was sitting inside the study of the Huxley family's mansion. He'd just looked at the reports on the losses that his family businesses had suffered. Because of this, he seemed to have turned into an iceberg emitting a cold aura that caused the surrounding air to drop in temperature quite rapidly. A few of his men were standing in front of him, not daring to even breathe loudly. While waiting for Virgil to speak, their lowered foreheads were already covered with sweat.
"How's the situation with the Radiants?"
Virgil asked grimly. "I've already sent some people to spread the news about the Blade Mountain bandits being protected by the Radiants, and I've also ordered them to gather together any citizens who have grievances against them to cause trouble at their construction site," one of the men reported in a compliant tone.
"Well done. Herman Thompson, Richard Swinton, and Joseph Thompson may all be protecting Kevin, but I won't let them bring the Radiants into St. Louis so easily."
Virgil put down the document in his hand and instructed them.
"Send someone immediately to stir up the crowd. We must use their anger to chase the Radiants out of St. Louis."
"Yes, sir," his men answered respectfully. Just then, one of his assistants rushed in and bowed his head. "Sir, it's bad. Your son has gone missing."
"Where did Thornton go?"
Virgil Huxley immediately stood up and walked over to his assistant. He grabbed him by his shirt and lifted him up off the ground. "I don't know. I just went to his room to deliver some food, but he was no longer there when I arrived." Virgil's assistant was so scared that he didn't dare to look directly into his eyes.
"Then what are you still doing here? Why haven't you taken some men out to look for him yet? If you can't find Thornton, then you don't dare come back here."
Virgil threw him onto the ground with all of his strength. Kevin asked the Swinton family's household staff to find Thornton a new set of clean clothes and prepare the guest room to let him take a shower. While waiting, Kevin sat down on the chair and casually asked him, "Tell me, why were you looking to speak with me so urgently?" I wanted to ask you to let go of your grudge against my father and spare his life," Thornton Huxley stammered. He didn't seem to have any confidence that Kevin would take his request seriously. Virgil Huxley had spread the news that the Blade Mountain bandits were being protected by Kevin and the Radiants. Then he instructed his men to continue inciting the crowd at the Radiants' construction site to use their anger to drive them out of St. Louis. Just then, one of his assistants reported that Thornton Huxley had gone missing. This angered Virgil, who demanded that they find his son immediately. Back at the Swinton family's mansion, Kevin asked Thornton why he'd been looking for him so urgently. Thornton then anxiously asked him to spare his father's life. Although he hated his father after learning about his bad deeds, what could Thornton do? After all, Virgil was his father. The moment he was born, his father was the one who'd raised him, taught him, and given him all the resources that he needed to nurture his growth and become the person that he was. Thornton knew that he didn't have anything to offer that could move Kevin to change his mind. And given that his father was far from an honorable man and didn't have any redeeming qualities of his own, he could only hope that his begging would be enough to appeal to Kevin's pity. "It seems like you know a lot about your father's recent activities, don't you?" Kevin poured himself a glass of water and asked him quietly. "I know that my father has done many unforgivable things, but he had no other choice. He did what he had to in order to revitalize and protect our family's legacy." Thornton answered weakly. "That's a clever way of putting it," Kevin sneered and said. "Do you know that your father stole a lot of precious antiques and cultural artifacts? And in order to maximize his profits, he's been selling them to gray markets from other countries. And on top of that, do you know how many families have been destroyed by his drug trafficking trade?" When he heard this, Thornton dropped to his knees with a thud and lowered his head in shame. He no longer had the arrogance he displayed when he first met Kevin, and he even changed the way he addressed Kevin. "Mr. Williams, I know my father's crimes cannot be excused, but I can't abandon him." Thornton was a huge man, almost 7 feet tall, but at that moment he seemed a lot smaller and he had tears in his eyes. "I've also investigated your background, Mr. Williams.
In order to save your own father and loved ones, you didn't hesitate to wreak havoc on other families either. You should be able to understand the pain in my heart."
Hearing this, Kevin didn't say anything more. He just looked at Thornton quietly.
"Mr. Williams, please have mercy."
Thornton desperately begged again. His eyes were red from all his crying. After a long time, Kevin sighed. "Thornton, you and I have known each other for quite some time. Based on your actions today, I'm guessing that your father definitely didn't tell you anything when he was doing all those unspeakable things. The only good thing that he did was to raise a son who actually has a conscience." Kevin continued, "But this isn't something that can be decided by our personal relationship. I hope you understand that this is a life-or-death battle between your father and me, not to mention the entire Huxley family. Besides, let me ask you something. If your father had the upper hand right now, would you also kneel before him and beg him to spare my life? Would the Huxley family give me a way out?" Thornton was stunned by Kevin's words. He understood that there was no more room for negotiation at this point. "Thornton, go back home and spend some time with your father. Cherish whatever moments you have left with him. At the end of the day, I'm just a man who can clearly distinguish between kindness and evil. Rest assured, I won't kill every single person in the Huxley family," Kevin said in a flat tone. This was the only thing he could promise Thornton Huxley. Within the territory of the Great Powers, there were great mountains surrounding a massive compound. Each mountain peak towered into the sky, looking exceptionally spectacular. This was the location where the Central Alternative Healing Academy's headquarters was located. Normally, it would definitely be a place that would inspire awe in people. However, at the moment, it was a battlefield filled with blood. Under the Alliance's attack, bodies were piled up everywhere. Plus, the Central Alternative Healing Academy's headquarters building had been significantly damaged and it was currently surrounded by the Alliance's army. Not even a mosquito could penetrate their defenses. "The reinforcements from the other schools haven't arrived yet?" Paul Vaughn was holding a longsword, and there were deep wounds everywhere on his body. Some of them were so deep that even his bones were visible in some places. Although his bleeding has stopped, it still made his guards tremble in fear as his aura had become much weaker than before. "Not yet, sir. We last received news from the men from the Southeast School for Natural Medicine who told us that they're less than 2 hours away from us." A member of the Central Alternative Healing Academy answered him respectfully. "That should be soon," Paul acknowledged with some hope. It had been a full day since he'd returned to the Central Alternative Healing Academy's headquarters. In that span of time, he bravely led his men to defend their stronghold by using the landscape of the mountains to their advantage. Although they were eventually forced to retreat, his strategy inflicted a lot of damage on the Alliance's forces. "Sir, I have some very bad news. All the medicinal herbs and pills in the headquarters have been used up," another one of his members suddenly announced. "How could our supplies have been depleted so quickly?" Paul asked with a deep frown. Before the man could answer, a loud horn sounded and Paul Vaughn's facial expressions changed as soon as he heard it. This was the signal that the Alliance was about to attack them once again. At the St. Louis Downtown Hospital, Kevin stood in the hallway outside of Catherine Swinton's room and handed over a pill to Richard Swinton.
"Is this really a system cleansing pill?"
Richard's voice was trembling. Shortly after solving the dispute at the Radiance's construction site, he returned home to the Swinton family's mansion, only to find out that the pill room had been destroyed. At the time, he was so angry that he had almost lost his mind, thinking that Kevin had miserably failed and hidden himself in shame. However, after finding out the whole story from his household staff, he fiercely scolded his daughter Gail and grounded her for a month. Still, the question remained as to whether or not Kevin would be able to concoct a cure in time. "Dad, hurry up and give it to Mom," Kevin urged him. He was exhausted from the effort. In order to concoct this pill, he'd spent the entire night awake. During that time, he had failed several more times before finally succeeding.
All right, Kevin. I really have to thank you for saving my wife's life. You definitely take after Alan.
Richard was overjoyed. He patted Kevin on the shoulder a few times and then quickly went to contact the doctor. Kevin took a long breath and sat on the bench. Then he covered his face with his hand so he could rest his eyes while waiting. "Thank you so much, Kevin." Brenda Swinton put her hand on his shoulder and gently rubbed it. Seeing Kevin so tired, she felt an inexplicable aching in her heart. "We're a family, so there's no need to thank me," Kevin casually replied without even raising his head. Brenda immediately remembered what her father had said about having her marry Kevin. Thinking about this made her face instantly turn red. Suddenly, a burst of hurried footsteps could be heard as a couple of men quickly followed behind Frida Zucker and walked over to the two of them. "May I ask if this is Catherine Swinton's room?" One of the men asked politely, but his tone was somewhat gruff. "Who are you?" Brenda's eyes stopped on Frida Zucker. "You're Richard Swinton's daughter, aren't you? And this person must be your husband." Frida looked at Kevin in surprise because she was so disgusted by his clothes. "Since when did he have a son-in-law? It's a pity that a delicate flower like you ended up planted on a pile of cow dung." Brenda's pretty face became even redder when she heard the woman say that. In contrast, Kevin began to furrow his brows as he stood up. In the past, he'd heard a lot of people call him trash, and he'd often been insulted for being useless. But this was the first time he'd heard someone compare him to a pile of cow dung. "Who the hell are you? This floor has been cleared of any visitors. If there's nothing else, please leave," Kevin said bluntly. "How dare you? Do you know who you're talking to?" The man standing behind Frida Zucker reprimanded him. "Apologize to our boss immediately, or else I'll definitely teach you a lesson in manners." When he heard this, Kevin was absolutely dumbfounded. Was he actually supposed to apologize for being called a pile of cow crap? "Looks like you guys are looking for trouble," Kevin sighed deeply. "Mom still needs to rest quietly, so we shouldn't disturb her right now. Why don't you just come with me? Let's go downstairs and settle this misunderstanding." At the same time, Kevin took a step forward and protected Brenda Swinton by keeping her behind him. He could clearly feel that these men had a very high energy base, so if they really decided to fight, Brenda could be at a disadvantage. Frida Zucker didn't mind Kevin's threat at all. Instead, she laughed a little and teased him. "Aw, looks like we've upset you. It seems like you didn't become their son-in-law for nothing. You still have some guts, so I guess you're not completely freeloading from the Swinton family after all." This made Kevin even more unhappy because her words had struck a chord with him. Did he really seem that weak to everyone? No matter where he went, as long as he was with a young woman, people would instantly assume that he was her family's useless son-in-law. Why did they always have that kind of impression of him? At the St. Louis downtown hospital, Kevin had just given Richard Swinton a system cleansing pill to cure his wife, Catherine. He'd stayed up the entire night to successfully concoct it. However, shortly after Richard went to see the doctor, Kevin and Brenda were confronted by Frida Zucker and her men. Thinking that Kevin was Brenda's husband, Frida compared him to a pile of cow dung, probably because he was dressed in shabby clothes as usual. This made Kevin wonder if he really gave everyone the impression that he was just a useless son-in-law. "I don't think my family's affairs have much to do with you." Kevin stared harshly at Frida Zucker. Now he was sure of one thing. This woman must have come to make trouble for the Swinton family. "For a useless son-in-law, you have quite a temper when it comes to family matters." Frida seemed to be very interested in Kevin, and she kept looking at him. "If you say that again, I won't mind throwing all of you out of this place." Kevin's face had completely turned cold and expressionless. When they heard that, the bodyguards who were standing behind Frida immediately went on alert and their bodies tensed up. Although they were expressionless, their hearts were in turmoil because of what Kevin had just said. How terrifying a boss was Frida Zucker for them to be so upset by this. While she wasn't as prominent a figure in St. Louis as Herman Thompson was, even Richard Swinton would have to be careful not to get Frida angry. And now that Kevin was treating her so rudely, would he be able to survive her wrath? "What's your name, young man?" Frida still didn't have a trace of anger on her face. On the contrary, she even seemed to have a faint smile. "My name is Kevin Williams," Kevin replied in a neither humble nor overbearing manner. The bodyguards behind Frida Zucker gasped when they heard him. Kevin Williams, of the Radiants. No wonder he was acting so arrogant. By now, his name had become known throughout all of St. Louis. It was because of Kevin that the Ryder, Ross, and Berger families had all been destroyed in one night. And it was Kevin who had quickly conquered the Blade Mountain Bandits. And it was thanks to Kevin that Herman Thompson had been cured of his mysterious illness. And now, the reason why the Thompson and Swinton families had joined forces against the Huxley family was because of the same young man who was standing right in front of them. I was wondering what kind of powerful man it would take to mobilize the members of the Radiants. But now it seems like the rumors aren't true after all. Frida shook her head in disappointment. Then why do you seem to be so interested in me? Kevin wasn't in a hurry to say anything more to her. A mocking smile appeared on his face. Mighty and imposing, a lion among men, the hero of our generation. Frida let out a long sigh. Looks like I can only imagine these things in my head now that I see you're just a useless son-in-law after all. Since you're so disappointed, then why don't you turn around and go back to where you came from? This isn't a place for uninvited visitors to hang around. Kevin pointed to the elevator at the other end of the hallway and ordered them harshly. You have 1 minute to leave this place. I'd like to see what you can do to me. Frida's tone didn't change from start to end. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and looked at him calmly. Kevin didn't respond at all to her challenge. He simply took out his phone and looked at the clock. After a minute had passed, Kevin started to smile viciously. It seems like you don't want to leave on your own, Kevin declared as he started to stretch his shoulders and his neck like he was getting ready for a little workout. He took a step forward and released his spiritual energy in an instant, completely enveloping Frida Zucker and her bodyguards under a terrifying aura. Then he grabbed one of the bodyguards by his shoulders and threw him in the direction of the elevator. When the bodyguard landed at the other end of the hallway, the impact made several cracks appear in the wall. Upon seeing this, the other bodyguards' faces suddenly changed. They didn't expect Kevin to be so straightforward with his actions. He'd turned on them the second their minute was up. One of the bodyguards was so shocked that he forced himself to speak up. Very nervously, he pleaded, Mr. Williams, please calm down. There's obviously been a misunderstanding here. I already gave you a chance, but you wasted it. After Kevin finished speaking, he grabbed another bodyguard by the arm. After a brief moment of shock, the bodyguard quickly reacted. In order to protect Frida Zucker's safety, he had no choice but to make a move against Kevin. But while he definitely couldn't be considered a weak man, it was a pity that the difference in strength between them was so great. As they grabbed each other's arms, the bodyguard had absolutely no effect on Kevin, despite pulling with all of his might. And when it was Kevin's turn to pull, the bodyguard's entire arm was dislocated in an instant. When they saw this, the other bodyguards decided to attack. However, Kevin casually dealt with them all, sending them flying one by one down the hall to the elevator. Do you want to leave under your own power, or do you want me to give you some help? Kevin shook his head, and the anger in his tone matched the sneer on his face. Just hold on for a second, Kevin. Brenda seemed to have remembered something. Aren't you the eldest daughter of the Zucker family, Frida Zucker? You have a good eye, young lady. You're indeed Richard Swinton's daughter. Frida praised her. Kevin frowned a little. Based on the results of the hospital lab's testing, Catherine Swinton had most likely been poisoned by the Zucker family. And now Frida Zucker had dared to pay her a visit in the hospital? Miss Zucker, I'm sorry. Kevin didn't mean to offend you, Brenda said apologetically. Brenda knew that Frida Zucker was powerful. In fact, no one in St. Louis had ever heard of the amazing things that this woman had achieved. About 30 years ago, the Zucker family was still one of the most prosperous families in St. Louis, and Frida was the one that their family patriarch had nurtured with all its resources. Unfortunately, for some unknown reason, she suddenly had a falling out with the entire Zucker family. Because of this, she had to live on her own for a few years before she finally achieved enough success that her family had no choice but to welcome her back into the fold. Many years later, Frida's status in St. Louis has continued to carry some weight as a very distinguished person, and the Zucker family still needed her to take care of many important matters. Similarly, Brenda also knew that Kevin wanted the Radiants to gain a foothold in St. Louis. Given this, if he had a bad relationship with Frida Zucker, it would be even more of a setback than offending the Huxley family. Don't worry, he's Richard Swinton's son-in-law, so I won't do anything to him, Frida calmly reassured her. Also, his performance just now was more like I'd expected from the mighty leader that I'd been hearing about. It seems the Swinton family really picked up a hidden treasure by having you marry Mr. Williams. Brenda tried to explain her relationship with Kevin. Miss Zucker, you may have misunderstood. Kevin and I... But Frida interrupted her. You don't need to say it. I understand. It's just that I didn't even receive your wedding announcement. Nonetheless, I can see that the two of you make a perfect couple. When she heard this, Brenda blushed so much that she looked like a tomato. However, an inexplicable trace of joy appeared in her heart as she replayed Frida's words in her mind. At the same time, Kevin was getting more and more serious. Right now, he only had violent thoughts about what he wanted to do to Frida Zucker. In the private room at the Garden Paradise, Jake Morris looked sternly at the old man standing in front of him. He was surrounded by more than 10 other men, all with powerful auras. Mr. Whitney, what brings you here? Jake asked with a serious expression on his face. Scott Whitney was one of the most influential people in the capital, but there was another important reason why Jake Morris remembered his name more clearly. He was the person in charge of the Reaper Squad. Scott didn't delay and replied, According to my sources, you've captured some people you shouldn't have messed with in the first place. Then he informed him, Kevin has joined the Reaper Squad as my second in command, and as part of our agreement, I promised him that I would protect his family as well. Scott continued, I don't want you to know the specifics of when the Morris family resurfaced, how things went south for you guys, or why your people decided to veer far away from your once honorable ways. But let me remind you that any family or organization affiliated with the great powers cannot harm innocent civilians. At the end of the day, everyone in this country is still bound by federal law. In other words, no one is exempt from abiding by the rule of law. So as long as you release them within 2 hours, I can let bygones be bygones. Otherwise, you'll have to face your judgment at the hands of the Reaper Squad. Jake Morris clenched his fists tightly. He never thought that Kevin would do such a thing and cut a deal with the Reaper Squad right under his nose. At the same time, he was surprised by Scott Whitney's arrival. While he knew that someone from the Reaper Squad had come to St. Louis, he wasn't expecting it to be their leader. Are you threatening me? Of course, Jake wasn't willing to let the two women go so easily. He didn't want his plan to fall apart completely. Lily Williams and Phoebe Anderson were his most powerful bargaining chips against Kevin. If he handed them over just like that, how would he ever obtain the power pill formula? Moreover, how would he explain his failure to the elders of the Morris family? In the private room at the Garden Paradise, Jake Morris was confronted by Scott Whitney, who informed him that Kevin had joined the Reaper Squad as his second-in-command. Whitney then demanded that Jake let Lily Williams and Phoebe Anderson go free or face the judgment of the Reaper Squad. Despite being caught off guard by this, Jake wasn't willing to surrender his bargaining chips against Kevin so easily. Moreover, he didn't want his plan to obtain the power pill formula to end in vain, and he certainly didn't want to explain his failure to the elders of the Morris family.
That's enough, Mr. Morris. If this matter gets out of hand, you'll suffer the consequences.
Scott Whitney didn't even bat an eye. Jake Morris gritted his teeth and asked, "What if I refuse to hand them over?"
You can't afford to play this game with us,
Scott Whitney warned him menacingly. Inside a luxurious mansion in Chicago, Lily Williams and Phoebe Anderson were now being protected behind 5 men, who were looking watchfully at the people who were standing in front of them. The auras of both groups were clashing and created intense sparks.
If you leave now, the people behind me won't do anything to you. But if you don't cooperate, don't blame us for not showing you mercy,
the leader of the 5 men said roughly. Just then, his phone rang. The leader of the 5 men was stunned for a moment. He slowly took out his phone and answered respectfully,
"Boss."
"Retreat immediately." Jake Morris's tone sounded a little defeated.
"Do you need us to bring the 2 women back as well?"
the leader of the 5 men asked him. "No need, just leave them there. We'll find another opportunity in the future." After saying this, Jake abruptly hung up the phone. When Scott Whitney showed up to talk to him personally, there was something he said that deeply struck a nerve with Jake.
"The members of the Reaper Squad have already rushed to Chicago."
The Morris family was familiar with the strength of the Reaper Squad, and if they attacked, Jake Morris knew that his men wouldn't be able to hold on for long. So instead of losing their lives for nothing, he might as well let them retreat for now, hoping that they'd be able to bounce back someday in the future. The leader of the 5 men looked carefully at the people in front of them one by one. After doing that, he decisively ordered,
"Retreat!"
The 5 of them walked cautiously out of the door. Then they escaped in different directions and disappeared from the Reaper Squad's sight in the blink of an eye.
"Mrs. Williams, Miss Anderson, are you all right? We're from the federal government, so you're safe now."
Josh Gibson, the team lead who'd been assigned by Scott Whitney, asked her calmly.
"We were ordered by Mr. Williams to rescue the 2 of you."
"Mr. Williams? You mean my husband?" Lily asked doubtfully. When this thought appeared in her mind, she immediately ignored it. While she knew that Kevin was the powerful CEO of the Williams Company, she was certain that he had nothing to do with the federal government. Was it really Kevin? Phoebe suddenly wondered as well.
"It was indeed your husband, Kevin Williams, who asked us to rescue you, Mrs. Williams. May I know where the 2 of you are planning to go from here?" Josh Gibson immediately added. "We'll keep you safe until he returns to Chicago."
Back in St. Louis Downtown Hospital, Richard Swinton had just spoken with the doctor and was now chatting with Frida Zucker, who was in the room with them. Meanwhile, Brenda Swinton was consulting with all the doctors as they were brainstorming ways to get Catherine to take the system cleansing pill. Kevin, who was sitting on a bench in the hallway, was quietly watching everyone. He didn't know why, but the more he looked at Richard and Frida, the more he felt like they were old lovers who were catching up after a long time apart. Looks like Dad also had his share of women in the past, Kevin thought to himself with a flattering smile. Suddenly, he received a call from Scott Whitney.
"I've already saved your wife and friend. You can arrange for someone to pick them up," Scott informed him. "Now that I've done what I promised you, I hope you won't let me down, Kevin."
"Don't worry. As soon as I confirm that they're not hurt, I'll put the pill formula in your hands," Kevin happily reassured him.
"All right.
Also, I'm not one to meddle with your personal matters. I still want to give you a word of advice. Be careful with the people of the Morris family. Your loved ones have already suffered because of their relentless pursuit of your pill formula, and they'll definitely find a way to get back at you for ruining their current plans. Scott hesitantly advised him. I understand. Kevin hung up the phone and called Mitchell Cook to bring him up to date on the news. After thinking about it for a while, he decided that he should return to Chicago soon. And when he told Richard Swinton about his plan, he let him randomly choose a luxury car from the Swinton family's garage and drive off to the airport. However, while Kevin was driving through the suburbs, a spot of light fell from the sky. It hit the Maserati with enormous force, and the car flipped over a few times as it burst into flames.
Bullseye!
A few men dressed in black called in to report from their hiding place in the forest. Once the mission is completed, return to base quickly. Be careful not to leave behind any traces. An excited voice came from the other end of the phone. After the leader of the group hung up the phone, he swiftly began to make arrangements for him and his team to retreat. Then they heard an extremely threatening voice. Since you're already here, you'd better stay where you are. The hairs on the 5 men's necks instantly stood up. They instinctively went back to back as they quickly searched their surroundings. Who are you? Are you from the Morris family or the Huxley family? Or are you assassins sent by the Stratus group? Kevin leaned against a tall tree like a ghost, holding a blade of grass in his hand. Kevin knew that many other people were watching him in the dark, so he deliberately used this trick to expose them all. It seems some of you are still lurking in the shadows. Why don't you come out and play? Hide and seek is a game for cowards and children anyway. Kevin teased them casually. When they heard this, the 5 men in black froze. They never expected that there would be anyone else nearby. Could it be that they weren't the only ones who were on a mission like this? How despicable was Kevin to attract so many enemies all at once? While the 5 men in black were thinking about these questions, a series of voices echoed in the forest. Suddenly, there were more than 20 other people surrounding them. Since you're all here to kill me, you should at least tell us who sent you, don't you think? Kevin said calmly, as if these people didn't pose any threat to him. That way, everyone can tell each other apart. Then we'll find out which one of you can kill me. On the mountain peak where the Central Alternative Healing Academy's headquarters was located, a fierce battle was taking place. Paul Vaughn, surrender now. Today will be the day that your Central Alternative Healing Academy will fall. The Sergeant-at-Arms King of the Alliance threw his head back and laughed. You worthless scum! You may have taken advantage of my absence to launch a sneak attack on my school. But I won't let you all get away with this so easily. We'll fight to the end, even if that means that we both perish together today. Paul suddenly swung his sword, instantly sending 3 members of the Alliance to their deaths as they fell to the ground. By now, there were a few more wounds on his body. However, despite bleeding profusely, he gathered enough of his spiritual energy to brave through the pain and face his enemy. Then let me see how tough you are. The Sergeant-at-Arms King jumped up into the air and was about to land right in front of Paul Vaughn. With his knife suddenly slashing down from above, he knew that Paul Vaughn wouldn't have the strength to withstand it given his current condition. Suddenly, a furious voice came from afar. How dare you! The powerful aura surrounding the voice made the Sergeant-at-Arms King pull his knife back in midair and turn around as he landed on the ground. Seeing that he was momentarily distracted, Paul Vaughn took the opportunity to strike, drawing a bloody line across his opponent's waist with his sword before retreating quickly. The Sergeant-at-Arms King made a muffled sound and took a few steps back. After checking on his wound, he looked at Paul Vaughn with anger. Taking advantage of others when they aren't prepared? Is this what your prestigious and upright school is teaching? Are you trying to compare the principles of the great powers with that of your evil organization? Paul Vaughn laughed as he supported his body with his sword. "Don't you know how devious you are on the battlefield with all of your underhanded tactics? We're nothing like you." The sergeant-at-arms king threw a clotting pill into his mouth and temporarily stabilized his injury. However, just as he was thinking of killing Paul Vaughn again, hundreds of flaming arrows suddenly rained down from the sky and bombarded the Alliance's camp. This instantly killed waves of their members, while those who were slightly further away were blown away once the arrows hit their stash of explosives. As the clouds of dust dispersed into the air, hundreds of tall and sturdy men were emitting waves of golden energy from their bodies as they marched onto the battlefield. The leader of the group was none other than Jeffrey Bowie. Just as the Central Alternative Healing Academy's headquarters was about to completely be destroyed, the reinforcements from the Southeast School for Natural Medicine had finally arrived. Back at the Central Alternative Healing Academy's headquarters, Paul Vaughn and his fighters were in the midst of a fierce battle against the Alliance. Just as the Sergeant-at-Arms King of the Alliance was about to kill Paul Vaughn, Jeffrey Bowie and the members of the Southeast School for Natural Medicine suddenly arrived with reinforcements, instantly bombarding the Alliance's camp with flaming arrows.
"Paul, what happened? Are you okay?"
Jeffrey Bowie's voice echoed throughout the mountain. With both sides suffering heavy losses at this point, the surviving members of the Alliance and the Central Alternative Healing Academy stopped fighting for a moment to regroup. At the entrance of the Salix Leaf Hotel in Chicago, Mitchell Cook, Rachel Collins, and Spencer had been waiting anxiously for some time after being informed by Kevin that Lily and Phoebe had been rescued. When they finally saw the two women being escorted over by a couple of people, Mitchell and Spencer hurriedly ran towards them. They were so relieved to see them that they didn't care about anything else. "Mrs. Williams, Miss Anderson, I'm sorry I was unable to save the two of you. On behalf of the Radiants, I'd like to apologize. Please punish me for my failure." Spencer respectfully lowered his head and practically begged for them to discipline him.
"I willingly accept the consequences for my shortcomings as well."
Although Mitchell didn't say as much as Spencer, his tone was firm and sincere. Upon hearing them, Lily was stunned. She remembered that time long ago when Grandma Jones had been forced to treat Mitchell Cook politely. But now here he was, actually down on his knees in front of them, and asking for forgiveness. While this was going on, Josh Gibson and the other members of the Reaper Squad naturally remained silent. To them, Mitchell Cook's social status was still too low for them to even acknowledge him. They were distinguished figures from both the great powers and the federal government, after all. Seeing that Lily hadn't answered yet, Spencer introduced himself. "Mrs. Williams, my name is Spencer and I'm Mr. Williams' subordinate. When you and Mrs. Anderson were taken away, your husband asked me to personally be in charge of saving the two of you. In my effort to do that, I brought over 2,000 of our men to Chicago for the rescue mission. After days of fruitless searching, we finally reached your hideout. However, by the time we got there, you had already been taken somewhere else." Only then did the two women understand why they were suddenly moved from the residential building to the mansion. "It's all right. You and Mr. Cook can get up now. I won't punish you." Lily tried her best to suppress the shock in her heart. "You've spent so much effort to save me. Why would I punish you? Don't worry. I'll tell Kevin that you both did your best." Only then did Mitchell Cook and Spencer stand up, but with lingering fear. "By the way, where is Kevin?" Phoebe suddenly asked. Spencer reflexively looked at Josh Gibson and the other men behind him, then replied, "Mr. Williams is in St. Louis at the moment because he has to deal with a very important matter. I hope the two of you can forgive him for not being here right now." Lily couldn't help but feel a sense of loss when she heard this. She didn't understand what Kevin was doing in St. Louis. Could it be that there was something more important than her? Or worse, was there someone he valued more? Rachel walked forward and held Lily's arm as she said, "Lily, don't think about it too much. Kevin's currently facing a dangerous situation. There are many things that cannot be explained to you in such a short period of time, but what matters now is that you are safe in our hands." Mitchell Cook hesitated for a while and then made a decision.
"Mrs. Williams, there's one more thing that you'll need to be mentally prepared for. I regret to inform you that the entire Jones family was murdered, and even their mansion was burned to ashes."
"What about my mother?" Lily's body trembled as she heard the tragic news and suddenly feared for her mother's fate. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of St. Louis, the forest was a mess and there were several dead bodies lying all over the place. With their facial expressions still fixed on what they were feeling during their final breath, some of their eyes were clearly filled with terror and their mouths agape from shock. Anyone who saw them would wonder how powerful and ruthless their opponent had been. Kevin took out his handkerchief and wiped the blood from his hands. Just then, he saw a man looking at him as if he'd seen the devil. Unable to walk because of his injuries, he was crawling backwards on all fours as fast as he could, wanting to distance himself from Kevin as much as possible. "Tell me, who are you?" Kevin asked him with a mischievous smile. Thus far, he'd already confirmed the identities of the first group of men. They'd been sent by Jake Morris. "Please, don't kill me." The man was completely in panic as he desperately begged for mercy. "There's a limit to my patience, and you're definitely not helping your case. If you don't say anything in the next couple of seconds, don't blame me for sending you off into the afterlife to join your buddies. I believe that they haven't gone far yet in their journey, so you should be able to catch up with them in no time." There was no pity in Kevin's eyes. Although he didn't take these men very seriously, he was starting to get very annoyed with how he was constantly being targeted like this. Couldn't they think of any other way to kill him other than throwing bombs and sending henchmen? "We're assassins from the Stratus Group. The Huxley family increased the bounty for taking your life." The man told him everything he knew. You really shouldn't kill me. I'm the nephew of the person in charge of the Stratus Group in St. Louis. If anything happens to me, my uncle won't let you get away with it, and he'll hunt you down himself." The man's body was trembling violently. Kevin could see that his lower body was damp and he smelled like urine. Who could have imagined that? This assassin from the Stratus Group was actually scared to death of Kevin. "Is your uncle very powerful?" "Unfortunately for you, I don't know him." Kevin's palm landed on the man's head, instantly taking his life. Just as he was about to leave, Kevin suddenly narrowed his eyes. Then he turned around and stretched out his hand to pull someone out of hiding behind a tree. The man was barely able to use his hands to break his fall. "Who are you?" Kevin wasn't in a hurry to make a move. The man immediately introduced himself as soon as he stood back up. "Kevin, you can't hurt me. My name is Owen Sullivan, and I'm from the Healing Arts School just like you." "You said you're from the Healing Arts School? Why should I believe you?" Kevin kept looking at him with some doubt. Owen's face suddenly became serious. "Let's dive into the river that flows deep." "But nothing is deeper than our sense of justice." Kevin immediately followed up with a reply. "For justice to prevail, we must work together," Owen responded to Kevin confidently. "And together we shall fight against evil as one." Now Kevin had confirmed Owen Sullivan's identity. These 4 sentences were only known by the students of the Healing Arts School, and it was also used as a convenient way for them to recognize their fellow members when they were off the school's grounds. "If you are a member of the Healing Arts School, then why did you come all the way down here to St. Louis? Were you here to spy on me?" Kevin asked curiously. "Dean Ford and Vice President Shepard issued an order to the entire school. The moment you leave the St. Louis city limits, we must immediately take you back to the Healing Arts School," Owen explained very somberly. "Originally, there were more than 20 of us who were sent here, but given a looming threat of war, everyone else was urgently called back to Chicago, and I was the only one left here to escort you back. Now that you've seen me, you'd better go back to Chicago. When I have time, I'll return to the Healing Arts School to visit those 2 guys." Since they were from the same school, Kevin had no intentions of fighting with him. "Kevin, I'm under the strict orders of the Dean and Vice President to bring you back with me to Chicago. Are you telling me that you plan to disobey them?" Owen asked coldly. If I don't go with you, are you planning to use force? Kevin raised his eyebrows and issued a warning. I advise you to save your energy. Hurry back to the Healing Art School. I don't like people following me behind my back. Owen Sullivan gulped in amazement at Kevin's attitude. Before being sent on this mission, he really looked down on Kevin, thinking that he was just a useless son-in-law. How powerful could he actually be? Moreover, he believed that Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard were foolish for getting all those people to look for Kevin and that they spent way too much time worrying about him. However, his opinion had completely changed since then. After witnessing Kevin's powerful and ruthless actions against all his attackers just now, Owen Sullivan felt incredibly lucky that he didn't have to make a move on him just yet. But if he let Kevin have his way and he went back to Chicago empty-handed, how could he continue to show his face in the Healing Art School in the future? He couldn't bear the disappointment of being a failure, especially after being the one left solely responsible for bringing Kevin back. With that in mind, Owen asked persistently one last time, hoping to convince Kevin otherwise. You really don't just want to leave with me? All right, fine, let's go. Just so happens that I was planning to return to Chicago today anyway. Kevin sighed as he put his hands in his pockets and began walking out of the woods. When he heard Kevin say this, Owen slowly became proud of himself. He thought that no matter how powerful Kevin was, he wouldn't be able to change his cowardly ways as a useless son-in-law. Because of this, Owen believed that Kevin only knew how to bully people who were afraid of him. But if anyone showed a little bit of strength and toughness in front of him, Kevin would immediately admit defeat. With this, Owen Sullivan immediately became overjoyed as he smiled from ear to ear, thinking about how Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard would reward him once Kevin was finally brought back to the Healing Arts School. As soon as he returned to his senses, Owen quickly ran to follow Kevin from behind. Meanwhile, back in the Radiance headquarters, Derek had just accompanied Dalton Steele back to his room and delivered him some food. When he turned around, he was surprised to bump into Roger Knott, who was taking a walk. His heart immediately skipped a beat when he saw him. Not seeing whose room it was, Roger Knott chuckled and patted Derek's shoulder. I didn't expect you to really care about your subordinates like this. Do you always personally deliver food to your visitors? After eliminating the men who'd been sent by the Morris family and also the Stratus group assassins hired by the Huxley family, Kevin met Owen Sullivan, a fellow student at the Healing Arts School. Kevin had been sent by Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard to take him back to Chicago. After initially refusing, Kevin finally agreed to return with him. Meanwhile, back in the Radiance headquarters, Derek had just delivered some food to Dalton Steele's room when he suddenly bumped into Roger Knott. Not seeing whose room it was, Roger lightly joked around with the surprised Derek. Mr. Knott, what are you doing here? Derek replied with an anxious smile. I had nothing better to do, so I decided to take a walk. I was quite surprised to see you here. Anyway, now that you're here, I wanted to ask when the Chancellor would be coming back. And will Mr. Williams also be back soon? Although Roger Knott asked this in a casual and relaxed manner, deep down he was actually very anxious to find out the answer, especially since he had to leave the Radiance's headquarters soon. This was because he'd received news that Brett Stewart was preparing to send members of the Myriads to ambush the Union's headquarters. And as one of the higher-ups of the Myriads, he knew that he had to go back and participate in the plan. Unfortunately, I really don't know where the Chancellor and Mr. Williams are at the moment. As you know, the two of them have always been quite elusive, Derek replied with an anxious smile. Nadia Alexander, who was holding a few herbs in her hand, slowly walked over and asked, Derek, I'd like to ask if the Radiance has any spiritual grass here. Just like Roger Knott, she didn't want to be idle. And since she had nothing better to do at the moment, she decided to find some herbs to concoct pills. She figured it was the least she could do for the Radiance as a new member, given her expertise in herbalism. Because the Radiance's headquarters was located in the middle of a mountainous area, she discovered that the spiritual energy was much more abundant than in other places. So it was the best place for both training one's strength and concocting pills. "And you are?" Roger Knott's gaze instantly stopped on Nadia Alexander. He knew that Kevin knew how to concoct pills. At the same time, there were also rumors among the great powers that Kenneth Wilkinson was also a great herbalist. But apart from that, he'd never heard of anyone else in the Radiance who could make herbal medicine. Could it be that the woman who was standing in front of him was yet another skilled herbalist? With 3 of them all highly capable of concocting pills, Roger was highly impressed by the Radiance's expertise. No wonder they could produce so many power pills to recruit new members. However, Derek was petrified, and he was cursing in his heart. He knew that the relationship between the Myriads and the Herbalist Society was like fire and water, and if the higher-ups of the 2 major powers were to meet, they would definitely start a fight. So he had to think of something quick to conceal Nadia Alexander's background. "Let me introduce the 2 of you to each other. Mr. Knott, this is the Radiance's Herbalist Grand Master, Miss Alexander." Derek didn't dare to say Nadia Alexander's full name. After all, who among the members of the great powers wouldn't know her full name? "Derek, you're too kind. With both Mr. Williams and the Chancellor having such exceptional herbalism skills, how can I be called a Grand Master? I'm nothing compared to them." Nadia didn't pay attention to what Derek had just said. On the contrary, Roger Knott's face was full of surprise. He quickly bowed to Nadia and said, "So it's Herbalist Grand Master Alexander. I'm really sorry for not knowing who you are. It's nice to meet you." Now back in Chicago, Kevin stretched his back leisurely as he exited the plane. Although his lifestyle in St. Louis was relatively more luxurious, Chicago naturally felt much friendlier and more comfortable to him after having lived there for the past 3 years. "Kevin, let me give you some advice. When we return to the Healing Arts School later, you better put away this bad temper of yours. Dean Ford and Vice President Shepard aren't just the heads of the Healing Arts School. On top of that, they're both considered big shots among the great powers. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Owen Sullivan deliberately coughed as he lectured him. "If you anger the 2 of them, the consequences won't be something that someone like you can afford." Kevin looked at Owen Sullivan as if he was looking at a fool. When they were on the plane, he also shouted orders several times at Kevin. The whole time, he just didn't want any conflict and brushed it off with a smile, but he wasn't expecting Owen to act so shamelessly and arrogantly towards him. "Who told you that I was going back to the Healing Arts School today?" Kevin scratched the back of his head and told him nonchalantly, "Just think about it. The semester hasn't even started yet, so we're still on a break. As I told you earlier, it's up to me when I'll go there. Rest assured, you can tell those 2 old guys that I'll pay them a visit when I have the time." "Kevin, what are you talking about? The dean's orders are above all else. If you dare to disobey, I'll have to force you to come with me." Owen warned him fearlessly. When Kevin agreed to come back with him back from the outskirts of St. Louis, Owen believed that this useless son-in-law had already admitted defeat. Moreover, Kevin didn't complain a single time whenever Owen impolitely asked him to do something for him on the plane. Because of this, Owen Sullivan had been in high spirits up until this point. But he didn't expect that after their plane landed in Chicago, this piece of trash would actually dare to go against his promise. "What did you say? Do you really think that you're a match for me?" Kevin held back his laughter. "Kevin, let me tell you something. Don't think you're so great just because you killed a few useless henchmen. You have to know that there's always someone better than you in this world. So don't be so arrogant to me." Owen sized him up with disdain. "At the end of the day, you're just a useless son-in-law from a small family. This is the difference between us. And you're lucky that I've yet to make a move on you. That being said, you should be grateful for all the kindness and mercy I've shown you until now. But if you dare to disobey me again, I'll have no choice but to skin you alive." Kevin sighed lightly and shook his head. Then he turned around and started walking towards the airport terminal. When he saw this, Owen was sure that his words had convinced Kevin to change his mind. A hint of pride appeared in his smile as he slowly followed after Kevin. Unbeknownst to him, before boarding their plane in St. Louis, Kevin had already told Mitchell Cook to send someone to pick him up. And as soon as their plane landed, several bodyguards immediately rushed over to assist him. "Mr. Williams." They respectfully lowered their heads to greet Kevin. "What's the plan?" Kevin asked them in a low voice. "Mr. Cook has already settled everything, so there's nothing to worry about. We'll escort you to the Salix Leaf Hotel now," one of them answered respectfully. "Hey, you piece of trash, where do you think you're going?" Owen looked at them and sneered. "You never told me that you were rich. You don't look the part at all. Then again, these bodyguards must have been sent by your wife's family, right? You're too useless of a son-in-law to afford them." Hearing this, all of the bodyguards suddenly felt their eyes twitch and their knees weaken. They didn't understand why this idiot would dare to speak to Kevin in such a rude way. Do I have to repeat myself a third time? I told you to go back to the Healing Arts School and leave me alone. I'll go back there and see those two guys when I have the time. Kevin patted Owen on the shoulder, then he turned around and said to the bodyguards, "I'm not very familiar with this person. I just need someone to give me a ride. The rest of you can stay behind and give this guy a warm welcome." "Understood, Mr. Williams." Of course they all knew what Kevin meant by warm welcome. "Did I let you go, you piece of trash? Didn't you hear what I said? Don't think that you're suddenly superior just because you have a few tiny shrimps to back you up." Owen looked at Kevin, who didn't even bother to turn his head and look back, and shouted loudly at him, "Stop right there!" Unfortunately, Kevin turned a deaf ear and walked away. "Damn it! I can't believe that you're going to make me come after you." Owen Sullivan tried to run forward and grab Kevin, but he was stopped by 4 bodyguards. "If you don't want to die, you should let go of me." Owen pushed 2 of them as hard as he could, but he was stunned. The 2 bodyguards didn't move an inch. Owen tried again, but the result was still the same. In addition, he found that he was starting to feel weak and there was suddenly no trace of spiritual energy left in his body. "What's wrong with me?" Owen panicked. Just then, he remembered that Kevin offered to get him a drink back when they were still on the plane. Could he have slipped something in it without him noticing? "Who did you just call a tiny shrimp?" one of the bodyguards sneered. "You don't have to worry about whether we'll die or not. After all, we're only here to make sure that you have a very warm welcome," another one said with a mischievous smile on his face. Mitchell Cook's bodyguards began to size Owen up. One of them kicked him in the stomach, and the intense pain made him curl up on the ground. "How dare you hit me? I'll make you pay for this." As a trained combat expert, when had Owen ever been beaten up by ordinary people? "We'll see about that." Another bodyguard suddenly punched Owen in the chin, making him see stars from the force of the blow. "There are too many people here in the airport. We can't cause a scene. Let's get him into the car and drive someplace more discreet. We'll teach him a lesson he'll never forget." The bodyguards immediately grabbed Owen by his hair and quickly dragged him into their car. Rachel had ordered the entire 17th floor of the Salix Leaf Hotel to be cleared, and Emo Squire's bodyguards were all lining the corridor, ready for anything that might happen. Meanwhile, Rachel was inside one of the rooms with Lily and Phoebe. Shortly after landing in Chicago, Kevin was about to leave the airport when Owen Sullivan stopped him. After Owen arrogantly insisted that he come with him to the Healing Arts School, Kevin still refused. And when Owen threatened to use force and then insulted him, Kevin instructed Mitchell Cook's bodyguards to deal with him as he went on his way to the Salix Leaf Hotel. At the same time, the hotel's 17th floor had been cleared out by Rachel Collins, who was currently with Lily Williams and Phoebe Anderson inside one of the rooms. "Lily, don't be so sad. Spencer said that he was able to rescue your mother and someone is already on the way to escort her here." Rachel looked at Lily's red eyes and her heart ached. Although she'd become Kevin's subordinate now, she still had a very deep relationship with Lily. "You said that the entire Jones family is dead, didn't you?" Lily asked with extreme sadness as tears kept falling from her eyes. While the Jones family had indeed done a lot of things that disappointed her, Grandma Jones and the rest of them were still her family no matter what. How could she feel good about them being wiped out like this? "Lily, I know it's difficult right now, but you'll eventually find a way to move on. After all, the dead can no longer be brought back to life." Rachel sighed and tried to comfort her. "Let me tell you this. The person who did this is incredibly powerful. It's not only the Jones family that suffered such a tragic fate. The Blair and Butler families were also eliminated." Rachel continued, "It seems that any family that had a conflict or relationship with Kevin was targeted. Even Drake Cook fell into their trap, and he's still lying unconscious in the hospital. You and your mother are definitely lucky to be alive along with Miss Anderson." Rachel let out a long sigh. She knew that this wasn't a force that Chicago could resist on its own. Luckily, Kevin would be back soon to take charge of the situation. Otherwise, she didn't know if she would be the next to suffer the same fate. Phoebe put down the glass of water in her hand and asked, "Do you mean that Kevin is in danger now?" "As far as we know, he's currently still in St. Louis. We don't know the exact situation there, though. Miss Anderson, you should know how powerful St. Louis is in the Midwest, right?" Rachel and Phoebe didn't have a deep friendship, so she addressed her more formally. Just then, the door of the room swung open and Dorothy Jones hurriedly ran in. When she saw Lily, she immediately started to cry. After being held captive by Paul Vaughn and the other leaders of the top 9 schools for the past few days until her rescue, Dorothy looked much more haggard than the last time she and Lily saw each other. Dorothy hugged her daughter and said tearfully, "Lily, because of that piece of trash husband of yours, I've truly suffered a lot this time. I was afraid that I would never see you again." Then Dorothy demanded, "You must divorce Kevin immediately. That useless son-in-law of mine has offended so many people and made so many enemies. We can't afford to keep such a huge liability in our home. We'd risk being killed or end up living in fear for the rest of our lives." Before Lily could say anything, Dorothy spoke again. "Don't worry, Lily. Mom will definitely choose a good husband for you." Rachel and Phoebe looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's hearts. At the same time this was going on at the entrance of the Salix Leaf Hotel, Kevin had just gotten out of the car and was about to go in, but was stopped by 2 security guards.
"I'm sorry, sir. This is a high-end hotel. We cannot allow people with untidy clothes to enter," one of the security guards said expressionlessly. Although Kevin was richer and more powerful now than ever before, he still liked to wear cheap clothes. However, the Salix Leaf Hotel was also one of the most chic places in Chicago. Even the security guards felt superior to the ones who worked at other properties. They even wore colored sunglasses so people couldn't see their eyes. "I just have to go in and find someone very quickly," Kevin said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. After experiencing this so many times, he already knew what was about to happen next. "I'm sorry, sir, but you can't do that. Please don't disturb us, and leave immediately. Don't ruin the mood of our wealthy guests." The security guard's face showed a trace of displeasure. Kevin scratched the back of his head and asked again, "Just let me in. I promise I won't disturb anyone." "Sir, please don't be like this. Leave quickly. Otherwise, don't blame us if we have to force you out." The expression on the security guard's face turned sour. This scene attracted the attention of the surrounding people. It was currently dinner time and the Salix Leaf Hotel's restaurant was almost full, even though it had a very large capacity. With one look, everyone could see Kevin's unsightly clothes. Their faces were full of disdain and their eyes were full of contempt.
Soon, all kinds of mocking words could be heard. "Hubby, look, this person wants to enter the Salix Leaf Hotel." A woman pointed at Kevin.
"I don't know where that young man came from, but how dare he behave atrociously here?" Her husband sneered. "It would be an insult if such a person were allowed to enter the Salix Leaf Hotel. Does he even have any money to spend?"
If it was anyone else, their face would have turned red from embarrassment, but Kevin was no ordinary person, and he had long gotten used to other people making fun of him. "Isn't this hotel a place for people to eat? I can go in and eat, can't I?" Kevin seemed very calm.
"Sir, I've already made myself very clear. If you don't leave now, don't blame us for being impolite."
The security guard's tone was getting louder and angrier. He thought that Kevin only wanted to enter the hotel to take a few photos to show off on social media. He'd seen many people like this in the past and wouldn't fall for any tricks this time. "But what if I really have to go in right now?" Kevin's face gradually darkened. His words immediately attracted the laughter of the people around him.
"Did I hear it wrong? Does this man actually want to force his way into the Salix Leaf Hotel?"
One of the onlookers wondered out loud. "Nowadays, there are really many young people who don't know how to stay out of trouble. What a waste," another sneered.
"Look at the poor clothes he's got on. Didn't he say that he wanted to eat in this hotel? I'm afraid he can't even afford a glass of water, let alone an entire meal."
A third one mocked and laughed. Most of the people around him were important figures in Chicago. As such, they had a sense of superiority and entitlement as they judged and ridiculed Kevin while they were eating. In their minds, if rich people didn't get to have fun at the expense of poor people, then how else could they show their value to society? Upon hearing the commotion, the lobby manager quickly rushed over.
"What's going on?"
When the manager saw Kevin, his eyes reflected his disgust and disdain.
"Sir, this man wanted to forcefully barge into the hotel, but I stopped him."
The security guard lowered his head and answered carefully.
"What is he still doing here then? Do you need me to teach you what to do when we meet such a good-for-nothing person? Hurry up and chase him away. We can't let him disturb the other customers' dining experience."
The manager tidied his clothes and slightly raised his chin as he instructed the guard.
"Did you hear what our manager said?"
The security guard looked at Kevin fiercely and threatened.
"If you don't leave now, we'll be forced to throw you out of here."
"Are you the manager here?" Kevin ignored the security guard's words and looked directly at the man beside him. The manager gave him a condescending look as he replied,
"So what if I am?"
"You said you wanted to chase me away, right? Why don't you apologize to me and give your superiors a call? Otherwise, you'll be very sorry for this mistake you're about to make." Kevin put his hands in his pockets, his face calm and collected. His behavior once again drew the ridicule of the people around him. "Hey, check this person out. He really thinks he's some amazing person." One of the hotel guests kept nudging his friend.
"What's there to see? He's just a pretentious person. He'll definitely be beaten up and thrown out like trash in the back alley."
His friend took a quick glance, then shook his head and continued eating his truffles. "I'll make a bet with you. This kid will definitely be thrown into the lake to feed the fish. Don't you agree?" The hotel guest challenged his friend.
"I think you're being too easy on him. You should know that the owners of the Salix Leaf Hotel are quite powerful. I'm sure there are a lot more ruthless ways to make someone disappear in Chicago."
The friend scoffed at the thought. These people were all joking and talking with each other as they took turns disrespecting Kevin from where they were seated. People like Kevin were usually stopped before they even got through the door, and now they believed that he was about to face the danger of his life. In contrast, they were able to sit comfortably in the hotel and enjoy all kinds of excellent services. The difference between the two of them was like heaven and earth. As far as they were concerned, someone like Kevin should already know his place and ought to stay out in the street where he belongs. Kevin had just arrived at the entrance of the Salix Leaf Hotel to see Lily and Phoebe. However, he wasn't allowed to enter due to the clothes that he was wearing. Thinking that he was just some lowlife who had nothing better to do, the security guard threatened to use force if he kept insisting on going inside. The commotion drew the attention of both the lobby manager and the wealthy people who were dining inside. When Kevin advised the manager to apologize and call his superiors, the others continued insulting and mocking him for not knowing his place. The manager took a deep look at Kevin, afraid that he would offend someone who was just pretending to hide his true wealth. However, after looking at Kevin for 1 or 2 minutes, he still couldn't see any difference between Kevin and someone of much lower stature.
"What are you two still standing there for? Do you want to continue working in this hotel or not? Hurry up and kick him out."
The manager suddenly waved his arm at the 2 security guards.
"Kid, you asked for it. Don't blame me for what's about to happen to you."
One of the security guards cocked his arm and threw a punch straight at Kevin's head. For a moment, the guests thought they were about to see Kevin being beaten to a bloody pulp. But in the next moment, the security guard let out a cry of alarm as he flew back almost 20 feet. Then he held his stomach and curled up on the ground, letting out a series of wails. "I don't want to fight you, so don't force me." Kevin didn't even look at the other security guard and just walked straight inside the Salix Leaf Hotel's entrance. "I didn't expect that kid to be a martial arts expert." One of the wealthy diners was in disbelief.
"Let's not get ahead of ourselves by calling him an expert. He might know some basic self-defense moves, but what's the use? I'm sure the owners of the hotel will crush him to death with a single finger once they find out."
His friend sneered. "Looks like we're about to have some live entertainment tonight. I bet that kid's legs will definitely end up broken." The wealthy diner laughed as he took a sip of his red wine.
"It doesn't matter if he has legs or not. He's about to lose his life,"
his friend retorted. The surrounding group of wealthy people stared at Kevin as if they were looking at a clown as they mocked him endlessly. The manager quickly calmed down.
"Kid, if you want to cause trouble, just go somewhere else. This isn't a place where you can behave so disrespectfully."
Soon, hurried footsteps came from all directions. A few seconds later, 20 or 30 security guards surrounded Kevin, each of them holding a baton in their hands. Just then, the bodyguard who had escorted Kevin to the hotel had just parked his car and was about to enter the hotel bar to get a glass of water. When he saw the scene, his eyes immediately widened in shock, and he was so scared that he forgot his thirst. He hurriedly pushed aside the crowd of security guards and stood in front of Kevin to protect him.
"What the hell do you think you're doing? Are you out of your minds? How dare you attack Mr. Williams? Don't you know who he is?"
The bodyguard reprimanded them all in a stern voice.
"I don't care who he is. He must pay the price for causing trouble here at the Salix Leaf Hotel,"
the manager said gruffly.
"Break his legs and throw him out onto the street." "Stop!"
A loud shout suddenly rang out and echoed throughout the lobby. When everyone looked over and saw Mitchell Cook walking over with a group of people, all of their facial expressions immediately changed. Mitchell Cook was very well respected in Chicago. His status was something that most wealthy people couldn't even attain with all their money and resources. "Looks like this kid is really finished now that Mitchell Cook is here to deal with him," a woman remarked to her spouse.
"I heard that Mitchell Cook is also one of the Salix Leaf Hotel's owners behind the scenes. He has a very strong relationship with Vice President Collins,"
her husband added. The manager quickly ran over to Mitchell Cook with an obedient look on his face. He lowered his head respectfully and said,
"Greetings, Mr. Cook."
Mitchell Cook ignored him. He walked straight over to Kevin and bowed his head to him.
"Mr. Williams."
His voice wasn't loud, but it was still strong enough to be heard all across the room. Everyone was petrified when they heard him. Everyone in Chicago had heard of Mitchell Cook's name and reputation before. Why would he bow his head and be so polite to this poor young man? Moreover, why did the name Mr. Williams sound so familiar? Some of the people suddenly seemed to have thought of something. Their faces turned pale instantly and their legs started to tremble.
"Sorry I'm late, Mr. Williams. You've suffered a lot because I kept you waiting."
Mitchell Cook apologized to him respectfully. "It's okay," Kevin said lightly and patted his friend on the shoulder. Then Mitchell Cook turned around and looked sternly at the manager, whose face had turned pale.
"Get over here right now and apologize to Mr. Williams."
After being scolded, the manager could no longer bear the pressure in his heart. He immediately dropped on all fours and crawled over like a dog. Then he knelt before Kevin and lowered his head in shame as he begged for mercy. He knew he'd made a grave mistake by misjudging him and treating him so harshly. As for the security guard that Kevin had thrown to the floor earlier, he kept lying on the ground and pretended to be dead. "Didn't you just shout that you wanted to break my legs? Why are you begging for mercy now?" Kevin didn't have any pity in his heart as he looked down at the manager. "Mr. Williams, I was wrong and blind to have offended you. Please forgive me." The manager was panicking, afraid for his life. Although the manager still didn't know Kevin's real identity, he realized that if Mitchell Cook treated him like that, how could he be an ordinary person? This young man in front of him was definitely not someone he could provoke.
"Do you still want to attack, Mr. Williams?"
Mitchell Cook kicked the manager in the stomach, sending him curling up on the ground, and then kicked his face again and again. In less than a minute, the manager's face was a bloody mess. Not only did some of his teeth fall out, but even his nose was crooked after what Mitchell Cook had done to him.
"Do you know who he is? This man is the CEO of the Williams Company, Kevin Williams. How can a scum like you offend the most powerful man in Chicago?"
Mitchell Cook couldn't control his temper any longer. He grabbed the manager by his hair and slammed his head into the ground. He didn't even take the manager's pleas seriously. In just a few minutes, the manager was on the verge of death at Mitchell Cook's hands, and he finally fell unconscious. Upon seeing this, the surrounding people were all stunned by what they'd witnessed, as well as by what Cook had just said. Over the past few days, the most famous person in Chicago was the useless son-in-law of the Jones family, Kevin Williams. Not only did he reveal himself to be the CEO of Williams Company, but according to the rumors, the Butler and Blair families were wiped out due to their conflict with Kevin. Some people even claimed that he'd caused the huge disturbance during the Hayes family's wedding in Detroit. Not only did he steal away the bride, Phoebe Anderson, but he also wiped out the entire Hayes family in the process. Because of all of these events, Kevin was no longer known as a useless son-in-law. On the contrary, his ruthless reputation had spread like wildfire, and his notorious name had become synonymous with the devil incarnate. As a result, when these wealthy guests thought of the ridicule they had been showing for Kevin moments ago, their bodies began to tremble. They all knew that if they accidentally offended Kevin, it would be better to buy a coffin and make their funeral arrangements. That would save their families a lot of time and trouble. Mitchell Cook waved his hand and turned to Kevin.
"Mr. Williams."
"You should know what to do with the rest of these people." Kevin patted his shoulder again, turned around, and dialed Rachel Collins' number to ask which floor Lily was on. Mitchell Cook nodded his head and looked around.
"I think I heard someone scolding Mr. Williams when I walked in here. If you have the guts, stand up and show yourself. Don't make me come looking for you."
When his gruff voice echoed throughout the lobby, everyone bowed their heads and looked at their laps or pretended to be checking their phones. They didn't even have the courage to look Mitchell Cook in the eye, let alone stand out and admit to their actions. After all, the manager was still lying unconscious on the ground. Who would want to end up like him?
"No one wants to admit it, huh? Let's see if every one of you is really innocent." Mitchell Cook looked around. "Someone, get me the surveillance footage of the entire first floor. Investigate all the background information of everyone who was mocking Mr. Williams just now. If they don't leave Chicago within 24 hours, we'll go after them and their families."